All right, we're going to start in a couple of seconds. As you may have seen, we have the slide up here, which says women's history is women's right. It is an essential, indispensable heritage from which we can draw pride, comfort, courage, and long-range vision. And I may add, to Gerda Lerner's wonderful quote, ideas. Welcome, welcome, welcome to the National Women's History Alliance first press conference. My name is Ellen Snortland, and yes, it's an improbable last name that sounds a lot better in Norwegian. And I am a women's advocate in all ways, with a focus on women's self-defense and women's history. We are lousy with history that no one knows about. I was at my ophthalmologist today before this, and I said, and he's a history geek, and I said, do you know that, do you know which month is Women's History Month? And he said, no, but I don't know any of the months. And I said, do you know what February is? And he goes, oh, Black History Month. And I go, exactly. And March has been Women's History Month for 40 years, since 1840, since geez Louise, since now, God, somebody help me here. 40 years ago, whatever that is.
1970, end of the 1970s.
1980, exactly.
1980.
And
Started by the
started by the National Women's History Association. So I'm going to stop talking pretty soon, but I just want to say, I was thinking, I am so annoyed that so few people know that Women's History Month is March. So I thought, well, okay, so what am I going to do about it? Well, I'm going to draw inspiration from one of my heroes who I love and adore and respect, Gloria Feldt, who is the co-founder of an organization called Take the Lead. And her most recent book of several books is Intentioning, which is, you know what? I'm just going to call a press conference because I can. I also say to myself, what would Eleanor Roosevelt do? And she would do that because she had seen how women were rejected from press rooms, and she started having women-only press conferences. So she didn't wait for somebody to suggest that to her, or that maybe she could do this. She just did it. She just out and out did it. So I thought, well, okay, you know what? I don't know how to do it, but I don't care. That's never stopped me before, so I'm just going to do it. So here we are, and thank you so much for attending. And I am going to start with Gloria Feldt, who, in her book, No Excuses, cited women's history as one of the 9 tools, and actually the first one she listed as a way to find your power. And I subscribe to that completely. And I am so honored to have her here today. We'll be celebrating her 80th birthday, and she has a conference coming up in Arizona that we are going to show the slides for. There's a free concert, which we encourage you to attend on the 25th to celebrate her birthday. And I'm going to be there, and I suggest that you all come. Celebrate 8, which is the years that Take the Lead has been in existence. And this is the Power Up Conference, starting with the free virtual concert. There's no excuse not to come. The powerupconference.com. And I also just want to acknowledge that Gloria just recently lost her beloved and feminist husband, Alex, not too long ago, July 17th, I believe. And that this is just more of her grit that she's here today giving us her time. So the other thing is that if you could make it to the actual conference, That's also available, and it's a hybrid concert and conference. So the powerupconference.com. And now I will yield the floor to Gloria Feldt, one of my favorite people on the planet.
Thank you, Ellen. I have to say, I was really enjoying rocking out to Sisters Are Doing It For Themselves, because that was my first ever march that I organized. That was our theme song for it. And I love that. I just think it expresses everything about what we're trying to do. And I so appreciate this opportunity, because I have had the privilege of being both a witness and a contributor to history, as has everyone else here. And because we are all both, we are a witness, but we are also a contributor to history. Every day we make tomorrow's history, and we need to say history, because I don't think there should have to be a Women's History Month. It should just be history, right? But we know that because women have so often been written out of history, it's absolutely necessary that we have Women's History Month. So thank you. Thank you, Ellen. Thank you, everyone here, for calling attention to Women's History Month, which will be coming up in March. And now we have plenty of time to plan for it, because we need to fill that gap in knowledge about the past that has actually, a lot of that lack of knowledge is what has brought us to where we are today, with many of the issues that we're fighting, and some of them we are fighting all over again. And it's also an opportunity to teach ourselves and the next generation the rich history of women's lives. My goodness, women's accomplishments, women's lens on the world is often not even present in our news, and how stories are chosen, how stories are framed, how stories are told. Women's lens is simply often not even there. So, and thank you, Ellen, for mentioning that in my 9 leadership power tools curriculum, it is really true that the very first power tool is know your history, and you can create the future of your choice. So I wanted to just say, a little bit about 3 reasons why I personally feel like it's so important to know our history. The first is very personal, because if you don't know where you've come from, it's really hard to know yourself fully and deeply. What's your heritage? Where did your grandparents and their grandparents come from? Where did you get your values and beliefs? What you think is a choice may not be a choice, because you may have learned something culturally, and you need to know where that came from. Know your history, and then you have the grounding to create the future of your choice. That's kind of where we all have to start. So look, the second thing is, I want to just say, like, who all has an iPhone? You know who created the iPhone? Whoops, I'm not getting that in the frame. Yeah, you probably know Steve Jobs, right? But Steve Jobs could never have invented the iPhone if it hadn't been for a woman named Ada Lovelace, who came a century before him. She developed the algorithms that enable the computer programming we have today. She never got credit for it, because it was almost unheard of for a woman to be working in the sciences as she was. And she was working with a man named Charles Bancroft, who took credit for her work. It's a good thing that Ada is being revitalized today, thanks to the current work to get more women and girls into STEM fields. But the point is that it's a good example of how women have largely just been forgotten and not written into the history books. Many accomplishments that have simply never been codified or known. And women's history as a separate discipline is almost never a requirement. I teach a course at Arizona State University every once in a while called Women, Power, and Leadership, and it's in the women's history department. And I noticed that sometimes men will take it because they think it's an easy 3 hours, and then they get really interested and they discover there was a lot they didn't really know, and it has a big impact on their lives, their family, their wives, their girlfriends, their mothers, whatever. So women's contributions in lives have scarcely been a blip on the screen. And so I think it's super important then that we realize that if you can't see it, you can't be it. We've all heard that phrase, I'm sure, and we need to know our history. But the third reason that we need to learn, that we need to have women's history taught and learned from, is we have to learn from the mistakes of our history. I was astonished when I was writing the book that Ellen showed you, that's called No Excuses, 9 Ways Women Can Change How We Think About Power. One of the things that astonished me in my research was to discover how often the women's movement has taken steps forward only to take steps back of our own volition. And it's almost as if each step forward was accompanied by doing the very thing that we are socialized to do as women, which is to put other people first. That happened with abolition, with wars, with other movements along the way. So to me, the most poignant lesson of the suffrage movement was this. It took 70 years from the time they started till the time they actually got women to vote, the right to vote in 1920. And by the time they were able to codify the 19th Amendment into the Constitution in 1920, the suffrage movement had literally narrowed their argument to, well, it doesn't matter if women have the vote, they'll just vote like their husbands anyway. And that's kind of what happened for quite a while. Because you see, at the turn of, this is why you got to know your history. At the turn of the 20th century, this is going to sound very familiar to you, by the way, the women's suffrage movement had a big agenda. They were talking about childcare, healthcare, fair wages, all of those things that we talk about today. But by the time they had secured the right to vote, they had dropped that entire agenda. They didn't even realize the power that they then had in their hands. And their prevailing leadership concluded that they were more likely to get the suffrage amendment passed if they backed away from that larger women's rights and social justice agenda. And the result is that the movement lost its edge as a political force. And that's a lesson of history I want us all to think about today. They thought they had won and they didn't ask, we've got the right to vote. Now what are the policies that we'd like to make happen? And it was only Alice Paul, one of the suffrage movement leaders, who realized that a movement has to move. And that power and energy always come from moving forward, not from standing still or backing off. And she wrote the Equal Rights Amendment in, anybody know when she wrote the Equal Rights Amendment?
1923.
You got it. You get the prize. And as you know, 99 years later, it still has not been written into the Constitution, even though the requisite number of states has now ratified it. So we got to learn from that history, and we have to keep moving forward, and we have to keep getting those things that need to be done. And I would be remiss if I didn't also connect this with what's happening today in the realm of reproductive rights and healthcare and justice. That really brings me to today, and probably an issue that's on everybody's mind. And I don't know if everybody knows that it was 100 years from the time the Comstock Law outlawed birth control, abortifacients, and information about them. That was 1873. The Comstock laws made birth control, even information about birth control, illegal. It was 1973 when the Supreme Court's Roe v. Wade decision made abortion legal after legalizing birth control in 1965. And again, the mistake was made. The movement thought it had won. You got to know your history. In a democracy, no rights are ever won forever, as we now can see by the recent Dobbs decision by the United States Supreme Court, which has overturned Roe, and with it, the judicial precedents that underlie the right to birth control, the right to same-sex marriage, and so much more. So all of that is just to say, we have to know our history if we want to create the future of our choice, rather than leave it to the political winds of the moment. So I thank you, National Women's History Alliance, for highlighting Women's History Month. And I say, let's make history by making knowledge about women's history so pervasive that it becomes just history. Thank you so much.
Yes. Yay, Gloria. Just the water that we swim in, right?
Yes, just that.
That's right. And Brooke Kroger is here with us. She's the
Yay.
author of Suffragents, which leads me to thank my sweet feminist husband who's running the background music and the slides for us. And so he's a definite suffragette kind of guy. Next, before we get into the question segment, I'm going to introduce some of my colleagues on the board of the National Women's History Alliance. And this person, oh my goodness, Rosita Stevens-Holsey. She is an author. Her book addresses young people about her very famous aunt, Pauli Murray. Now, this is a little bit like preaching to the choir. Probably a lot of you know who she is, but most people don't know. And it is a dirty, rotten shame because Pauli Murray was a trailblazer in law, in clergy, and LGBTQ. She's just an amazing person, and it makes me go, what do you need to do? Be a saint to be recognized? Oh, wait a second. She is a saint in the Episcopal Church. And so with no further ado, I'm very honored to introduce Rosita Stevens-Holsey, one of my colleagues on the board. Rosita?
Where is she?
Are you on mute? You're on mute.
Oh, Pauli.
It's my pleasure to be with you today.
Pauli.
I am Pauli Murray's niece, the oldest daughter of her sister, Rosetta. And my life and Aunt Pauli's life intersected for about 43 years. And of course, during that time, I knew her as my aunt. We were very involved in family events and activities, just normal things that families do. Several of us lived in Washington, D.C., and we were her Washington, D.C. headquarters.
Betty Chapman. I'm sorry I missed your call. If you will leave me a number, I will return it as soon as I can. Thank you.
I became very aware of the fact that many people had never heard of her. And of course, I had never heard of her as someone who was extremely special and powerful in her areas of expertise and education. But I took a trip to Durham, where there was a project called the Pauli Murray Project to enhance her legacy and to create a social justice center for others to follow. It's very hard to think of just what to say about someone who's an attorney, an activist, an advocate, a poet, a priest, an author, a college professor, a labor organizer. But after realizing that as one of her relatives, it was important that I not only learn about her, but that I do something proactive about her. And I thought it would be important to provide a book or work that young people could use so that young people, when they are like sponges and inquisitive and love education, could learn about her. So hopefully she would be an inspiration to them. One of the things that I've learned while talking to young people is how many young people had no idea that not very long ago, brown and Black people could not ride anywhere on the bus or go to a restaurant of their choice or sit where they wanted to sit in the movies, and possibly their families couldn't buy a home in a neighborhood that they wanted to live in. So it's important, as Gloria said, to know your history and to know what happened before us so that we can move forward in our society. So I'm very pleased to have joined the National Women's History Alliance so that we can write women into history. And of course, I hope Reverend Dr. Pauli Murray will be one of them.
Thank you so much, Rosita. I think she would just be so proud to know what you're doing. And there are several very great documentaries out about Pauli Murray now. And she was in one of the Ruth Bader Ginsburg films too. And her arguments were rejected by men as being too radical, and then ended up being the spine of the Brown versus Board of Education suit that won. So she's really instrumental to our system of justice. All right, next up is another board member that I'm really pleased to introduce, and she is our youngest board member. And she is exactly our dreams come true. Priscilla Padmanaban is a high school student, and she was profoundly upset by the degree to which women were missing in her upper level history classes. So she took matters into her own hands. She's an activist. She started her own organization called WEAR, Women for Education, Advocacy and Rights, which is an organization dedicated to gender equality that focuses on writing women's history back into our curricula. And she's had great success in amending the curricula in Fairfax County Public Schools in Virginia. And she serves as the Virginia NOW Communications Vice President. And she is just a badass. I don't know what else to say. And I'm so proud to be her friend and her fellow board member. Would you take it away, Priscilla?
Thank you so much for that. Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for that amazing introduction. It is truly an honor to be speaking with everyone, and especially be amongst my fellow board members here. Honestly, all of you are an inspiration to me. The National Women's History Alliance is an organization that has done so much for women's history, but I have found that, you know, when people think about women's history, they just think about what's in our textbooks. And a lot of times for kids, that's really harmful, because growing up, what I've learned in our, curriculum systems is often women were only doing domestic roles, or they would be sidebars on pages fully about men. My favorite example is that every year without fail, we learn about Paul Revere and his triumphant journey to, warn that the British were coming. But never once did any of my colleagues or I learn about Sybil Ludington, who was a 16-year-old girl who did the exact same thing. In fact, in my opinion, more honorable, because she went over horseback, I believe, over 40 miles across state lines to deliver the same exact message. So these kinds of stories are constantly left out of our textbooks and our curriculum, and we need to not only celebrate them, which is why it's such an amazing theme for our 2023 Women's History Month, but we also need to educate everybody about them, and especially the younger generations. One of the things that really inspired me to start WEAR and to join the National Women's History Alliance was because of how much I saw the lack of education about women's history manifest in our societal oppression of women. It becomes a narrative that women haven't contributed as much, or that women are left out of history because of their own volition, because they didn't do as much. While that's obviously extremely untrue and harmful for students, because then they grow up and they internalize the fact that maybe women just haven't done as much. And a question that I get often because of that is from younger students. And a lot of times they'll be like, well, why does women's history matter anyway? Or they'll be like, what women's history am I really missing? Why is this a big issue? And to me, those questions are, really encompassing symbols of the fact that there is a lack of education. Because if you can trivialize such a broad and important topic as women's history down to just, well, why is it important? Then clearly there's a big lack of education about it. And so we need to learn these stories, especially from, a student perspective. My parents are Indian immigrants, and so I'm a first generation Indian American. And so I've grown up hearing like a plethora of stories from my mom about Indian women and freedom fighters who were all women and who did so much, and, you know, we're doctors, we're lawyers, we're just all kinds of different professions and did so much. And then when I came to school, I didn't learn those same stories about American women. And it was always really hard to grow up and not learn why women were important. And so celebrating those stories and ensuring that students are confident that women contribute and have been contributing forever equally is extremely important and something that I and all of my fellow board members here are dedicated to. So it's just really important to emphasize women's history, and all of us are making history right now. So we need to make sure that, especially with the current events going on, we continue this fight and celebrate the stories of the past and what women have contributed and continue to do. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Priscilla. So it's important for us to keep our eyes on state legislators, because there is some chatter about taking back the ratification of the ERA, some of the states to do that, because now they've had this green light with Roe versus Wade and things being kicked back to states' rights. So we got to keep our eye on the ball. And as Gloria said, you know what? It's never done. It is never done. Now, the next person I've known for years and I adore, and she's my cleanup person. If there's something I've forgotten, she will take care of it. She's been my co-chair in this press conference. And Martha Wheelock is a Renaissance woman. She's a collector of suffrage memorabilia. She is a filmmaker. She is right in the center of marches and protests, and one of the people that I cherish with everything I have. And she's the one that had me invited to be on the board with the National Women's History Alliance, because she knew what a geek I am about history. So without further ado, please help me welcome Martha Wheelock. You're on mute.
Thank you, Ellen. Thank you, Gloria, so much for your inspiration. I've known you a long time through your wonderful work at Planned Parenthood and elsewhere. I would like, first of all, just to read to you all. You're like speaking to the choir, but what I'm hoping is that many of you can go out and spread some of the ways that we all can be involved with the dissemination of more women's history. The theme for 2023, and it's not early to get this theme out. Molly McGregor, our devout leader, has been getting requests already for what is the theme. The Women's History Alliance provides the theme for national and local groups and individuals for the celebration of Women's History Month. So throughout 2023, the National Women's History Alliance will encourage the recognition of women, past and present, who have been active in all forms of media and storytelling, including print, radio, TV, stage, screen, blogs, podcasts, news, social media, I would say art and dance as well. This timely theme honors women in every community who have devoted their lives and talents to producing art and news, pursuing truth and reflecting society decade after decade. Our storytelling in the media, our storytelling sisters in the media are essential to make our collective history visible. Together we can know more fully the women's history landscape. And I'd like to give a couple of examples of how this happens. World War I began, and of course all the men went out to do the reporting. But that didn't stop dozens of women reporters going into the breach as well, reporting on what was happening to the women, a wider narrative about women in war. And of course, they didn't get very far, but there are several, they didn't get the recognition. There are several fascinating stories of Edith Wharton, Nellie Bly, and 30 other American women who worked as war reporters. They tell different stories, and it's very important as well. And of course, you know that Nellie Bly became insane, quote, to tell the story about institutions of the mentally ill. And Ida B. Wells reporting on the lynching. In other words, every issue needs another perspective. And this is why you who, even if you're not in the media right now, you can go into your library and say, where are the women's books about science? Just recently, there was an announcement about whooping cough. Whooping cough. You remember that from the, when I was a kid. And I finally found out that there were two women, Grace Elderling and Pearl Kendrick, who were the discoverers of that vaccination, of that vaccine in the 1930s. And they were poo-pooed and whatnot and kind of ridiculed because they were women, but they saved thousands and thousands of lives in the 30s and onward. So here's to Grace and Pearl. So where are the women in our scientific research? Well, they're all there. And that was reported by two women, one at the Smithsonian and one at the History Channel. So if you have an in and you find an interesting story about women and what they've done, please, encourage your network to broadcast it and even put it on your Facebook page. We can't have too much of this stuff. In the National Press Club was founded in 1908. And of course, it was all men. The women were still being reporters, but they were not invited to be there. They formed their own little group at Alice Paul's National Women's Party. And but it wasn't until the late 1950s that women were allowed to attend the National Press Club. And where did they put them? They put them up in the balcony so they could not report or they could not have any participation. And so the women went off, and of course, in good fashion, they formed their own group, the Women's Press Club. And wouldn't you know, they invited men to become part of it. So that led to, I guess it was in 1971, when the National Press Club finally voted to accept women into their midst. And a fun fact is that Gloria Steinem was the first woman invited to speak. So we have a lot, this is really current history almost. This is to honor all of the women, and I would suppose the men who tell women's stories as well, but to honor the women who have gone on and told our stories. We will be sending you something soon about ways that if you find a story, if you find a way to get Girl Scout troops looking into an ancestor in their town, to send us names and reporters. We have just recently launched with the Justice Bell Foundation a wonderful idea called ourhistoryproject.org, where you can go and learn about how to find your connection or ancestor, or and even if you didn't think you had an ancestor who's connected to suffrage or even the fight for equal rights, you can follow us as we film a couple of stories with African-American women in Pittsburgh, and another story of a woman who worked in the 1915 campaign in Pennsylvania with the Justice Bell campaign. And there's so many ideas, and one of the things we hope that you all can bring to the table are ways to get women's history into your book group, when you check out at the store, there's a lot of wonderful ways that you can live it. And let's make women's history a movement so that it's not like, oh gosh, you got to ask permission to have Susan B. Anthony's birthday. Let's make it a movement. Let's just have it as part of our DNA, that we will foster the women whose lives need to shine and who have never had the light of the sunshine on their names. Say their names, repeat their names. Remember Gertrude and Pearl and the whooping cough and the women reporters of World War I. I think I could talk on and on about the women that I've discovered, but it was actually as a teacher in the early 80s, I had no women's history lessons. And it was one of my students that said, well, maybe we could do something for Susan B. Anthony Day. And I said, oh, okay. That pushed me, like it did Molly McGregor, into finding out more about my ancestors in women's history. And one of the wonderful things about women's history is that it is diverse, it's inclusive, it doesn't matter, your race, your ethnicity, your class. It has that ability to include and embrace all women. Thank you. And thank you for spreading the seeds of women's history. And thank you for being here. And the Women's History Alliance has lots of merchandise and lots of great things to celebrate our Equality Day. Today, by the way, August 18th was the day that Harry Byrne in Tennessee voted, as Gloria said, for the final 36th state. But it took then a couple of days afterwards and struggle for it to get actually into the Constitution on August 20. Did I say April? August 26th. So, tra-la, thank you. Forward into light.
Tra-la. So I am going to encourage you all to be a nudge for women's history. I mean, I want you to walk into any place you're at and go, okay, where are the women? Where are the women? Are they under here? Where are they? Where are they? And to have fun being a nudge, because you know what? Nobody's going to be a nudge for you. And if we get out there and insist on being seen, insist on giving us our due, then we'll move this freight train with all of us, a big troop of nudgers. Couple things. One is that now I would really like to open this up to one of two things. If you have a question, and really have it be a question and have it directed toward a specific person, we'll hold off on comments, because all of us, since we are the choir that we're preaching to, could talk for hours about our area of passion. So one, to direct a question specifically to one of us, Gloria or the board members. And then secondly, specific ideas that you've already had while you're here. For instance, here's the thing. I asked my mother, I said, have you ever had an abortion? She said, no, but I paid for my sister's abortion. And she had to go to Chicago to have an illegal abortion. She didn't hide it from the family. There just wasn't a way to get a legal one. So I was a school teacher. I was one of the only people that had a wage, and I paid for her. And I went, I wonder how many people ask in their own families what the family history of reproductive rights are. So think globally, act locally, ask locally, and then it'll become more global. So if you have a question, if you know how to use the reactions button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you can raise your hand and I will call on you. So either a specific question or a specific idea, and then we can have as many people participate as possible. Okay, I'm going to call on Joanne Callahan. You can unmute, Joanne. You're on mute, Joanne. You're still on mute.
Okay, I've been involved with women's history for a long, long time. Read a lot about it. What we really need to do is, I want to see whenever someone makes a misogynistic comment about women's history, we have, we have a chain reaction. We send tens of thousands of letters to the editor. We have Twitter storms, that type of thing. We really bring the attention. I want to see that in the National Women's History Project. And I mean, I could give you tens of thousands of examples from the Women's Suffrage Centennial, the New York Times, so many media outlets. I think it just became a misogyny festival. And So yeah, what are the plans for these history groups to have these, I call them slam the servers groups, groups where, Biden makes a real patronizing comment about the women's suffrage movement. And we send, tens of thousands of letters. We have Twitter comments, that type of thing. I mean, we've really used the internet to really, really raise the volume of women's history activism and let them know that we're not going to let them patronize.
Great, thank you, Joanne. As far as what plans do we have, in a way, the National Women's History Alliance is a clearinghouse, and we provide a way to.
Okay, I hate to interrupt here, but I'm on the mailing list, and I have never, ever, ever gotten any message to, hey, say, look, the New York Times made this really offensive comment about the women's suffrage movement. Here are letters to write to the editor, we have a Twitter account. Here are all the comments to write. That's the type I'm thinking. A Women's History Alliance doesn't have that, at least not yet.
Yeah, and I'm just going to say too that a lot of us are not social media literate, and we're looking for younger mentors to mentor up, whereas we usually think of mentoring as an older person mentoring a younger person. We need younger mentorship. So we are doing the best we can for a 43-year-old organization. And I don't
Well,
want
it's a really good suggestion, and it's what the Ms. Magazine does at the when they posted print ads that were offensive to women, and we will keep that great idea active. Thank you so much.
Okay, so ideas you have or specific questions for people, and keep the comments toward the end so we can get as many people as possible. Yes, Jennifer.
Hi, Ellen. I have an idea. I am in the process of producing my first podcast pilot called A Fat Perspective, and the focus is on what life is like in a non-society praised body. So after hearing Gloria talk about, hey, we really need to get in touch with our history and know where we came from, I was like, it would be really great to do a series on women who trailblazed or who defied the traditional, like the white women, thin, chic beauty aesthetic, and started trailblazing for those of us who don't fit into that, and how their work started, who started the genesis of body positivity and that kind of thing. So thanks for inspiring that.
Oh,
That's great.
Great. So we have 62 people here, and hopefully 62 people will be out there creating their own projects and then letting us know at the National Women's History Alliance what you're doing. And we'll have a section in our website to highlight what people are doing. So if you want to join up with people who are already active, that will be available to you. And then we have a question here that I can't really answer, and that is, we have a webinar coming up on the 20th, which is this Saturday. And you have, let's see, we have a slide for that. And it's really a powerhouse of a webinar created by our fellow board member, Diana. And I'm vamping here for the slide to come up. But Ellie Smeal, I mean, come on, these people are outrageously active in the world. Can you make that bigger, Ken? So we can read the text.
They can go to our website, Ellen, and register there.
Okay. And that's the National Women's History Alliance.org.
Yes.
And Camila Chavez, I can't read this.
That's Dolores's daughter.
Yes.
Dolores Huerta's daughter.
Okay, why don't you read those off?
Camila Chavez, Ting Ting Ching. She's a civil rights attorney. Janice Mathis, also an attorney, but she's executive director of the National Council of Negro Women. Eleanor Smeal, president and co-founder of Feminist Majority and Foundation, and also publisher of Ms. Magazine. Then there's Julie C. Suk. She's a professor and also an attorney and author of We the Women, that tells about the mothers of the Equal Rights Amendment. And they're the panels.
And the keynote speaker, Diana.
And I'm just about getting to that. There's the moderator, Bertha Gaffey Gorman, who's a very delightful person and is an experienced journalist. And our keynote speaker is the fabulous Dr. Shirley Weber. She's our current Secretary of State of California.
And Diana, there's a question. Is there an ending time for the webinar?
The doors will be open at 10:45. The program starts promptly at 11, and we anticipated ending the program about noon. And if we go over, it would be no more than 5 minutes.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Okay, so Elaine.
And one thing, if you are, someone sent me an email saying that they're canvassing during that time. And so they're registering anyway. And people that are registered, and if they're not able to view it, we're recording it, and people that are registered will be able to get the recording of the program.
Okay.
Great.
Okay, so thank you, Diana. All right, so next is Elaine of Women's Spaces. Do you have a question for one of our panelists specifically, or a specific idea?
Well, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I had the idea about over 20 years ago and then retired and then picked it up again to do a radio show dedicated to ordinary women doing extraordinary things. And my claim to fame is that Molly McGregor and I went to school together at Sonoma State. Anyway, I will be interviewing Molly on Monday. We will be talking about, of course, the 102nd anniversary and about the National Women's Alliance, but we will also be talking about the ERA and where it stands and what people can do. So I put up an email, it's www.womenspaces.com, or if you want to listen to the show on Monday, you can stream it on www.kpbf.org. And I think the idea that I had is I have almost 1,000 women recorded on the archives at Women's Spaces. So you can see all kinds of women, several interviews with Molly, several interviews with, I have a great interview with Gloria Allred that people will enjoy. And my idea is that women need to support women that are doing women in journalism, women on the radio. I mean, it's very important that you support your community radio stations because most people like myself, I'm a volunteer. I actually pay $35 a month to be on the air. So it's very, very important that I think women support other women and support the media of women that are doing these types of programs. And I thank you for allowing me to be here. It's very exciting. I mean, we went to Sonoma State, which is the birth of the Women's History Alliance. And it used to call the Women's History Project. And it's an honor for me to be here. And I thank you so much for doing this program.
You're so welcome. Women storytellers, we need each other. I mean, we have a proud history of telling children around the fireside to watch out for a bear because what happened to Auntie Mame might happen to you. I mean, it's a matter of survival. I'm going to call on Joanne, but before I do that, Brooke Kroger has a new book coming out that addresses women in journalism. So Brooke, would you please share about that?
Yeah, I'd love to.
Okay.
So it's unfortunately not going to make March, though it was, but now it's scheduled for mid-May. Knopf is the publisher, and the book is Undaunted, how women changed American journalism. It covers the period from Margaret Fuller in 1840 to yesterday.
Woo!
That's it.
Yay.
It's very long. I'm sorry, it's long, but that's yeah, it's been many years' work. So all the periods since the suffragettes.
Oh, very, very important too. Thank you. Okay,
you.
Joanne.
Okay. I was thinking of something that anybody who in their own home, their free time could do for women's history. My grandmother was always active in her community. After women got the vote in 1920, she became more of a nudge, as you called her. At the end of the 1920s, early 1930s, when my mother was an infant, she ran for Congress. I have copies of letters that she wrote, newspaper articles that my aunt, who was 12 years older than my mother, collected over the years, sent me 12 days before she died, knowing that I was interested in women's history. I'm in the process right now of I'm a scrapbooker. So I'm creating a scrapbook, and I think any person who has memorabilia like that could put those kinds of things together and either donate it to a college or to the thing. The one thing that I have not been able to find, and this is talking about women being written out of history, is I know she ran for Congress as a Democrat, contacted the Democratic Party in Florida, and they told me, quote, "We only keep records of the winners, not the losers." So,
Which is more proof that history is written by the victors.
yeah. So, but it's something that I think anybody who has talked to their family or even has friends, like I have a girlfriend whose great aunt was the first registered female architect in Pennsylvania, and we've got about 9 houses here in the town I live in, and she was a spy into the early incarnation of the CIA.
Wow.
Wow.
So
let's see here. I want to spread this around, and again, here we're preaching to the choir, but a lot of people don't know that the founding fathers, at the urging of our founding mothers, knew about the Iroquois, which actually called themselves the Haudenosaunee. The founding fathers invited them to come to Philadelphia as they were formulating the Constitution. And so there were several male leaders from the Haudenosaunee Iroquois Nation that showed up, and their first question is the question that I want you all to be asking all the time, which is, those men, those leaders said, where are the women? They could not fathom that one would be creating a nation without women involved in the creation. That was just not on their screen, so to speak. So if you do anything today, I want you to have that on the tip of your tongue as you nudge along. Where are the women? Where are the women? Where are the women? So we have time for 2 more comments or questions. All right, let's see. Meredith, please.
Hi, thank you very much. I'm Meredith Machin, Legal and Voters of New Mexico and AAUW New Mexico. I've been working a lot on women's history. And I just wanted to mention that this week, the Otero-Warren Quarter, American Women's Quarter, was issued in advance of Women's Equality Day. And I don't know, I have to ask a question. So does everybody know that she ran for New Mexico House of Representatives and the only seat? And that the reason she lost was that her uncle, Miguel Otero, who was the governor, outed her as a divorcee rather than a widow. So that was my question. Yeah, she actually was what people would say today, non-binary. She lived with, homesteaded adjacent land with Mamie Meters for 35 years. And so, oh, anyway, look at that. You're right on top of it. Thank you very much. But she really worked for women's rights, for education, for multiculturalism. And I think it's very important. There are not that many quarters actually released when they quarters, but U.S. Mint is coming to Santa Fe where I live, and there's a Nino Otero school, and they will be talking to the children there, and there are sleeves that children can collect all of the American women quarters. So anyway, look for that. Hopefully you'll have it in your newspapers. I think it's a big deal to have a person of color, a woman's rights, and then anyway, very important. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Great.
Thank you so much. The other thing too is that if I do this as a personal mission, I always quote women equally as I quote men. Because of the lack of women's quotations, there's this kind of unconscious bias that maybe we never said anything important, which is absurd. So it may take a little bit of digging to find a women's quote, but it's definitely worth it. Okay, so I'm going to call on Alice now. Alice March, please. Where are you? No, you're on mute, Alice. Alice, unmute.
You're supposed to unmute me. I unmuted me.
Yeah, okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Ellen, I've known you a long time. You wrote about me a long time. And I'm sitting here and I am so grateful to be here because I have not known that this even existed because I've been so busy in my own particular work of 40 some years. There's a place we have to go, women, before we can really make the impression that we need to make, and it's in us. And that is we have to learn to speak up. We never got permission at home to speak up. I am an elder. I could tell you stories that never quit about Alice, don't say anything. That was the general warning I got. I have learned to speak up, and it even amazes me. Sometimes I have to put up my hand and say, wait a minute, I have something to say. Until we are really flushed out inside, internally, and know that we are worth what we have to say, we've got a problem. Now, I've studied attention since 1992. I've written 2 books, so I know what I can do. I was a selective mute because I couldn't speak up. And now I'm a worldwide speaker. And I have a radio show on which I've interviewed over 100 people, the title of which is Why Our Attention Matters. And what you've all been doing is paying attention to what's happening to women, but not the way I look at attention. The way I look at attention is what's between people. It's the energy that's between people. And we are getting what we need to do the job that you've all stated we have to do. It's up to us to be responsible for that.
And on your radio program in March, you're going to highlight women, right?
Oh, I will.
Yes.
And my last name is March, and I was born in March. So, I mean, I've arrived.
Okay. Thank you, Alice. Any questions specifically for any of our panelists? So this press conference is for you to act locally with whatever ideas you have and not tell other people what you think they should do. It's like, we're full of ideas. There's no lack of ideas, but what is it that you can do that will further advocate and promote women's history? not what you think other people could do. We have lots of ideas. What will you do? And what can you do? And it can be just as local as using women's quotes or writing to Good Earth Teas and say, hey, include some women's quotes on the tabs of your tea. Okay, Marta.
Hello, thank you for having this. This is wonderful. I'm in Bellevue, Nebraska, and I'm very active politically. And so I think one of the things, we have a woman running for governor, and I am really concerned because there are all these, you know, comments and, well, we don't know her, blah, 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 and there's not a lot of money to work with. So I just appreciate all the things that have been shared here, and I'm particularly interested in the quarters. So I put my email on the chat. But I think that now, is especially with what's happened with the Supreme Court and with an unnamed individual who is selling the big lie, you know, I think that we have an opportunity to not only tell our stories, but I think to really get involved and encourage people to get informed and to vote and to get involved in campaigns. I particularly work with the Latino population, and there is such a hesitancy to get involved, and it's just taking a lot of energy, time, and information to get a larger, the Latino community is really growing. And there's a lot of fiery women out there, and we need to get them educated and involved. So thank you for all the work you do. And I love the different ideas that have been shared. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. There are a lot of comments in the chat, and I disabled the chat for almost everyone, and I can't keep up with them, but I want you to know that we'll be following up with an email for everybody who's attended, and we'll address those things for you. And if you don't want to be on our mailing list, we have your email addresses by virtue of you having registered. Just say unsubscribe and we'll do that. But in the meanwhile, we'll be sending you ways to access what we've talked about today. Okay, anybody else? Martha, you had your hand up?
No, I was just going to say what you just did, Ellen, is that we will follow up with this. A couple of real easy resources for you to be involved in is called ourhistoryproject.org, where you can join us in our search for our suffrage ancestors and our women who work for equal rights. And we will put a lot of this information that you all have graciously donated to us, and we'll put it all out. And we'll be creating a residue for you to send in your ideas and your accomplishments and your women that you've discovered. And let's thank those women who tell our stories in all sorts of ways. And there we go. And happy Women's History Month forthcoming.
Okay, I'm going to wrap
Women's
this up.
Equality Day coming up first.
Yes, Women's Equality, August 26th. And in August 25th and 26th, we have the Power Up Conference that you can visit virtually, or you can go to Arizona. And let's see, let's have some closing comments and then we'll wrap this up. Martha,
I'm sorry, can I jump in really quick? Sorry. I apologize. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I joined late, and I just apologize. I just wanted to say I completed a feature-length documentary about women getting the right to vote and how we're still not equal, which pertains very much to this conversation that I'm sorry I missed out on, but I would love to share it with a group.
Okay, so email it back to us when we send you an email, okay?
Perfect.
Okay, good. Good.
I have a quote from the Susie King Taylor Institute, she was an African-American Civil War nurse, and her institute is having a display of artifacts that people have found in their attic dealing either with African-American history and women's history. But this came from her her post, and stories have the power to release us from the past and to put us on the journey to self-discovery, truth, and healing. They have the power to offer up deep truths and emotions about who we are as individuals and emotions about who we are as families, communities, and a nation.
Thank you. Yay. Closing comments, Rosita?
I would just like to share that there's a 90-minute documentary on Amazon Prime called My Name is Pauli Murray, about Reverend Dr. Pauli Murray.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much. Priscilla?
Yeah, I just want to say that I think, celebrating women's stories is so important. And just like a quick anecdote about that, this year when I was in AP US History, which is a very high level history course that high schoolers take, you would think that, they would cover everything. However, I was talking about the ERA and how Virginia was the 38th and final state to ratify it. And the look of complete confusion on my classmates' faces, one I'll never forget. When I mentioned the ratification of the 38th statehood that we all live in Virginia, they were confused. And then I realized it was because they didn't know what the Equal Rights Amendment was. And so it's just so important to stress these stories and educate our younger generations and educate every generation about women's history and celebrate women's history, which is what we do at WHARE and what we do at the National Women's History Alliance. And so, I just wanted to share that and say thank you so much, and that never forget women's history. And like Ellen said, always ask, where are the women? Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, great. And Gloria?
I just second what everybody else has said. It's up to us to tell the stories. It's up to us to ask the questions. It's up to us to make sure that women are being actually recognized, and the accomplishments of women, and even the things that women have done that have not been accomplishments. I mean, women aren't perfect either, right? But you need to know all of it. You need to know all of that history. I was just thinking that I when the pandemic started, one of my younger cousins, much younger cousins, started doing a family genealogy research. And lo and behold, we found out that we had female ancestors just 2 generations back who were in Europe, who were already dentists, city council people. I mean, we didn't know any of that. And once you know these things about your own family, then you have more of a sense of pride in yourself, and then you can translate that into women writ large on the public scene, in politics, in business, in whatever field it may be. And so nobody's going to tell our story but us. Nobody's going to do it but us. So sisters are doing it for themselves. We'll go back to the song you were playing. So thank you so much for having this conversation. It's so important. And thank you for including me in it. And bravo on what you're doing.
And nothing is too small. Even a dinner party or even a gathering around a meal, just bringing it up and saying, who's your favorite woman in history? And if people draw a blank, and that's informative, and not as a way to embarrass somebody, but just to have people go, wow, I could know more people. So anyway, thank you so much for attending. We will follow up, and I'm just so proud of all of you, and keep acting locally and thinking globally, because that's how we're going to move this ahead. And thank you so much for attending.
Thank you very much.